truth is one without a second. The sages have described him in many different ways. Therefore, one may not be able to acquire very firm and complete knowledge from one spiritual master. One may not get complete knowledge from one spiritual master. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation: although God is one, sages have described him in different manners. For this reason, one may not be able to gain a complete understanding of God from one ordinary spiritual master. Okay. The BBT purport reads, Srila Sridhar Swami comments on this verse as follows, quote, the statement that one requires many spiritual masters certainly needs explanation, since practically all great saintly persons of the past did not take shelter of many spiritual masters, but rather accepted one. The words Giyate Bahu Darshibihi, or the absolute truth is glorified in many ways by the sages, indicates the personal and impersonal understandings of the absolute truth. Now, this is quoting Sridhar Swami. In other words, some sages describe only the Lord's impersonal effulgence, which is without spiritual variety, whereas others describe the Lord's manifest form as the personality of Godhead. Thus, merely by hearing from many different authorities, one cannot actually learn the highest perfection of life. The proliferation of differing spiritual authorities is useful only to counteract the living entity's tendency to be grossly materialistic. Different spiritual philosophers create faith in the existence of the soul and may be accepted at that level, but, as will be clarified in later verses, the spiritual master who ultimately gives perfect knowledge is one, unquote, Sridhar Swami has written. Paragraph. Srila Jiva Goswami comments as follows on this verse. And so this is an important verse. Quote, since it is commonly understood that one is to accept a single spiritual master, why is it recommended that one learns from many so-called spiritual masters appearing in the forms of ordinary material objects, like the wind and the sun and the sky? And the explanation is that one's worshipable spiritual master will instruct one in many departments of knowledge by giving lessons gleaned from ordinary objects, as recommended by the Brahmana Avadhuta. One can strengthen the teachings received from one's acharya and avoid transgressing his orders by observing ordinary things in nature. One should not mechanically receive the teachings of one's guru. The disciple should be thoughtful and, with his own intelligence, realize in practice what he has heard from his spiritual master by observing the world around him. In this sense, one may accept many gurus, though not those who preach against the knowledge received from the bona fide spiritual master. In other words, one should not hear from persons like the atheist Kapila, unquote. That was Jiva Goswami. And now Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur also comments on this verse as follows, quote, it is stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Tasmat Gurum Prapadyeta Jigyasu Shreya Uttama 11.3.21. Celebrated verse, Prabhupada quoted often. in the earlier parts of this chapter. This is the the Navi Yogendra speaking to Maharaj. Translation. Therefore, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master if one actually desires to achieve the highest perfection in life. Jigyasu Shreya. Similarly, in Canto 10, verse 5 of this canto, that's coming shortly, like 7-8 verses later, the personality of Godhead himself states, Mud abhigyam gurum shantam upashita mud atmakam. We're going to see that phrase several times. Or one must serve a bona fide spiritual master who is in full knowledge of my personality and who is not different from me. Unquote. There are many similar verses in Vedic literature indicating that one must take shelter of a single bona fide spiritual master. We also have the examples of innumerable great saintly persons who did not accept more than one spiritual master. Thus, it is a fact that we should accept one bona fide spiritual master and receive from him the particular mantra that one is to chant. That's Diksha Guru. I myself certainly follow this principle and worship my bona fide spiritual master. However, in worshiping one's acharya, one may take help from good and bad examples. By observing examples of good behavior, one will be strengthened in devotional service, and by seeing negative examples, one will be forewarned and avoid danger. In this way, one may accept many ordinary material objects as one's spiritual masters, considering them as shiksha gurus or gurus who give important lessons for spiritual advancement, unquote. Thus, in the Lord's own words, Mud abhigyam guru this is, the diacritics are messed up. Abhigyam gurum shantam upashita mud atmakam. One should approach a single bona fide spiritual master who is in full knowledge of the Lord's personality and sincerely worship him, considering him to be mud atmakam, or not different from the Lord. This statement does not contradict what the Lord has presented in his teachings of the Avadhuta Brahmana. Not a contradiction. If one receives the teachings of one's acharya, but keeps them locked up in his brain as theoretical dogma, one will make little advancement. To develop steady, complete knowledge, one must see the teachings of one's acharya everywhere, semicolon. Thus, a Vaishnava offers all respect to anyone or anything that gives him further enlightenment in the path of worshipping his bona fide acharya, who is not different from Lord Krishna. Paragraph. Among the many gurus mentioned by the Brahmana, some give positive instructions and others give negative instructions. Pingala, the prostitute, and the young girl who took off her bracelets provide examples of proper conduct, whereas the hapless pigeons and the foolish honeybee provide examples of behavior to be avoided. In both cases, one's spiritual knowledge is enriched. Thus, one should not misunderstand the meaning of this verse in a way contradictory to the Lord's statement, Mud abhigyam A big yum, gurum shantam upashita mud atmakam. That's 11:10:5. And here's the translation. It's the second half of that verse. Krishna speaking directly to Uddhava. Ultimately, however, one should approach a bona fide spiritual master who is full in knowledge of me as I am, who is peaceful and who, by spiritual elevation, is not different from me. Okay, that's the BBT purport. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's purport, much shorter. The most correct meaning of the word Brahman is Lord Vishnu. There is no worthy song or subject for hearing other than that which glorifies Lord Vasudeva. There is nothing actually worth learning in this world other than knowledge leading to the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Cultivating knowledge in a way that is not related to the Lord can do nothing more than enhance our material enjoyment. Okay, here's Bhaktisiddhanta's summary or rewording of Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's commentary. 3 paragraphs. The question may arise that since the Supreme Lord has said Tasmat Gurum Prapadyeta Jigyasu Shreya Uttama, that's singular, one should take shelter of a self-realized spiritual master who knows the science of the absolute truth and inquire from him about one's ultimate welfare, then how can one have more than one guru? Shweta Ketu and Brighu are examples of those who had more than one guru. So I spent some time yesterday looking up Shweta Ketu and having more than one guru specifically, and not much information. The little bit that I found was he's mentioned in the Chandogya Upanishad, and what I'm reading from is the Bhaktivedanta Institute writing a Vyasa Puja offering to Prabhupada on this Shweta Ketu. That's where it's from. Upon receiving a sacred thread, Shweta Ketu, the son of the sage Uddalaka, was sent by his father to a forest ashram to study the Vedas at the feet of a guru. Uddalaka knew that without studying the Vedas, a Brahmana is a Brahmana in name only, so he directed Shweta Ketu to learn and clearly understand the Vedas. Paragraph. When 24 years old, after 12 years of intense study, Shweta Ketu returned home, proud of his profound knowledge. However, Uddalaka, seeing his son's inordinate self-esteem, wanted to examine him to see whether he had truly understood the Vedas. Paragraph. Tell me, dear boy, said Uddalaka, have you learned the knowledge by which even what is not heard about becomes heard? Can you perceive what cannot be perceived? Or do you know what cannot be known? Unable to even grasp his father's questions, Shweta Ketu humbly asked him, "O father, I do not know about all this. Would you please enlighten me?" At this point in the Chandogya Upanishad, Shweta Ketu's actual learning begins. And then, so Chandogya Upanishad is dealing with these subtle, abstract concepts. Without, there's summaries of what is the exchange. But the specific to what's being spoken here by Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur, Shweta Ketu had multiple gurus. Well, there was one in the forest, and there was his father, and that's all that I know. And mention a Brigu, No, if anybody online knows the answer, please send it in or send it to my email address, because no indication. Brigu was one of the direct sons of Brahma, mind-born son, Brigu. So his father certainly gave him instructions, Brahma to Brigu. But other than that, no indication that I'm aware of, other than Vishwanath says it's known that he had multiple gurus. Paragraph. In this regard, the Brahmana replied, quote, "It is true that I have only one initiating guru, but in the field of practical activity, I have found that these 25 objects, although there's 24, somehow it becomes 25, as providing very good and bad examples to take lessons from." Now, tomorrow morning, we're going to go more deeply into the multiple guru topic, or Shiksha Guru, and the relationship between Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru, as illuminated by Shivaram Maharaj in his writings on that topic, because it's on topic. And then the following day, we'll have the final class. It'll be a shorter class, and we'll go through that. There's Burijan in his writing, Backward Glance, he calls it, the summary of Canto 11 and 12, Backward Glance. He lists 25. So we'll read out the 25 for, wrap up. So 25. I have found these 25 objects as providing very good and bad examples to take lessons from, and so I've accepted them as my Shiksha Gurus, or instructing spiritual masters. By observing examples of good behavior, one will be strengthened in devotional service, and in seeing negative examples, one will be forewarned and avoid danger, unquote. So note that the BBT translation or commentary, BBT purport, just cutting and pasting from Bhaktisiddhanta's writing. Paragraph. I have learned to become detached from 8 spiritual masters: the pigeon, fish, deer, young girl, elephant, snake, moth, and kurara, bird. I have learned both renunciation of the temporary and acceptance of the eternal from 3 spiritual masters: the honeybee, the honey thief, and Pingala. I have learned how to cultivate interest in the Supreme Lord from other spiritual masters, beginning with the earth. Acceptance of many instructing spiritual masters often helps to strengthen one's convictions. That was Bhaktisiddhanta's gloss of Vishwanath's commentary. Here's Vishwanath's commentary. It is said, Mud abhigyam gurum shantam upasita. One should worship a peaceful guru who knows me. That's coming attractions, 11:10:5. Krishna speaking directly to Uddhava. And tasmat gurum prapadyeta jigyasu shreya uttama. The inquisitive person should surrender to the superior guru. That's 11:3:21. Same references. So it's putting a nice focus on the topic. From these statements, it is understood that one should accept only one guru. Shvetaketu, Brigu, and others did not accept many gurus. I think that's an error. They did accept many gurus, at least. Anyway. And true, I have accepted one guru who gives instruction on mantra, but considering things which act as examples of what is favorable and unfavorable for performing worship, I have made those things my gurus. They are my shiksha gurus, teaching by negative or positive example. Sridhar Swami has applied this verse, and he gives the Sanskrit translation. The pigeon, fish, deer, young girl, elephant, snake, moth, and kurara bird are gurus teaching what to avoid. The bee, honey collector, and pingala teach what to avoid and what to accept. Other items, such as the earth, teach what should be accepted. So, specifically, that's Sridhar Swami's commentary on this verse, this morning's verse. Paragraph. There can be many shiksha gurus who generally strengthen one's knowledge. That is explained in this verse. Quote, should we accept shiksha gurus who have knowledge? Unquote. That is true, but because knowledgeable persons have many philosophies, where will I get someone with the same philosophy as mine, meaning my guru? Brahman, which is only one, is glorified in many ways, impersonal and personal, by the sages. It is said from Mahabharata, na savrishir yasya matam na binam. A person is not a sage if he does not have a different opinion. Therefore, I have accepted common objects as my shiksha gurus. Jiva Goswami writes in his Krama Sandarbha, and then we'll read from Bhakti Sandarbha, and we're done. The summary of the verse, although the Lord is one without a second, the sages have described him in many different ways. Therefore, one may not be able to acquire firm and complete knowledge from one guru. That was the verse. Commentary. Quote, one should have one qualified guru. From him, one will attain knowledge with all its parts. Or, quote, other opinions will be presented by others. What is the use of using material objects as gurus? Unquote. Steady, complete knowledge cannot be attained from the mouth of one guru. Why? There are many different ideas about Brahman. To strengthen the ideas presented by the Mahaguru, or to destroy contrary ideas in order to contemplate properly with one's intelligence, ordinary objects can be considered gurus. But one should not accept persons like Kapila with contrary ideas. Now, that's Jiva Goswami from Bhakti Sandarbha makes reference to this. We'll read what he writes. Anuchhed 203. There are two types of speakers. 1, with attachment. 2, without attachment. The speaker with attachment is full of material desire and greed. What he says does not touch the heart. He teaches in this way without examining the subject matter carefully. What is taught in this way is harmful to the population. Quoting Brahma Vaivarta Purana, quote, the person desiring to hear should worship the Supreme Guru, who is potent with bhakti, who is the ocean of wealth of knowledge, without regard for the Guru's family lineage, character, or conduct, unquote. The Guru's potency of bhakti is described in this Brahma Vaivarta Purana. Sarasam. That's the essence, the bhakti potency. Elsewhere it is said, quote, "The speaker is the best guru if he enlightens people filled with lust and anger, misers and depressed persons when they hear him," unquote. Doesn't get the scriptural reference. If such a guru is not available, some people take shelter of many persons with a desire to know varieties of means, which is this verse. Although the Lord is one without a second, the sages have described him in many different ways. Therefore, one may not be able to acquire firm and complete knowledge from one guru, unquote. Dattatreya speaks to Yadu. So this is Bhakti Sandarbha Jiva Goswami indicating that this verse applies when one cannot find a singularly qualified guru. One may then go to many gurus. That's his explanation. Here's a different translation of the same section. And we're going to end. In the Brahma-Vaivarta Purana, it is said, quote, "It is said that there are two kinds of speakers, passionate and dispassionate. Passionate speakers are lusty and greedy. Their words do not touch the heart. Without careful study to determine the truth, a passionate speaker gives instruction. Teaching without careful study brings destruction of the people. A dispassionate speaker is described in the following words. One who desires to hear the truth should approach a bona fide spiritual master whose words are like nectar and who is an ocean of truth. He should not take into consideration the spiritual master's family disposition or performance of Vedic rituals." I like this translation better. The spiritual master's eloquence and other virtues are described in these words from Brahma-Vaivarta Purana. Quote, "When hearing the spiritual master's teachings, even a person filled with lust, greed, and a host of vices, even a miser, and even a person filled with despair, will enter the eternal spiritual world. A person who can eloquently speak so this is done is the best of spiritual masters. A person who can eloquently speak in such a way they change the hearts of people is the best of spiritual masters. When such a highly qualified spiritual master is not to be found, some people, desiring to hear different views, take shelter of many teachers. This is described in this morning's verse, which we read. The meaning of this verse is clear. The verse quoted in the beginning of this Anucheda was spoken by Dattatreya to King Yadu. So tomorrow we'll go further into the Shiksha Guru topic and the relationship between Shiksha Gurus and Diksha Guru. Because, in other words, it takes this teaching, which is found elsewhere, puts it in ISKCON context, modern context. So now we get to see some nice graphics. Somehow I didn't bring, okay. We're going to the screen and we're going to see Shruti Mangara making a nice image to illustrate. Srila Sridhar Swami comments on this verse as follows. The statement that one requires many spiritual masters certainly needs explanation, since practically all great personalities of the past did not take shelter of many spiritual masters, but rather accepted one. The proliferation of differing spiritual authorities is useful only to counteract the living entity's tendency to be grossly materialistic. Different spiritual philosophers create faith in the existence of the soul and may be accepted at that level. But, as will be clarified in later verses, the spiritual master who ultimately gives perfect knowledge is one. That's a direct quote of Sridhar Swami. So it's a nice summary of what it's the way that it starts out, going back 3 chapters, or chapter 7. The Brahman is explicit, and the commentary expands that explicit statement that he didn't learn this from someone. Now, you have to learn something from someone. But, he's Dattatreya, so he learned from himself. It doesn't go into the Diksha Guru, Shiksha Guru topic as we're going to do tomorrow, extensively. Commentary that we read, it does. And then there's an etiquette, which we'll hear, for the student, for the Shiksha Guru, for the Diksha Guru. There are relationships, and we have this multiple guru system in ISKCON. And not just multiple Diksha Gurus, multiple persons who guide and instruct us in very significant ways. Now, a guide, in one sense, there's, rather than, we'll go into the topic tomorrow. Someone that guides is not exactly a Shiksha Guru. Someone that, although one can take it, that which enhances this primary relationship with the personality of Godhead, then the wind and a bird and a fish and so on, a bee, can be taken as a Shiksha Guru in that sense. Anyway, we'll discuss that tomorrow. So let's see if there's some discussion. It's 12 minutes after the hour.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Maharaj, here in the verse, they said that if one receives the teachings of one acharyas but keeps them locked up in the brain as a theoretical dogma, one will make a little advancement. So is it like a miser, just not giving what we received?
It just remains, but it's more than that. It stays theoretical. In other words, even for self-application, it's still theoretical. And supposing someone gives, but it remains theoretical, then it doesn't have the same efficacy.
So lacking of the practical application.
Yes. Personal practical application and helping persons come to the stage of personal practical application. Now, so so it's more than the miser. It's one who knows but doesn't apply. I guess you could say one who has wealth but doesn't use it. In that sense, I guess it's similar. Yeah, similar.
Okay, thank you.
Maharaj, it talks about atheist Kapila.
Yes.
Who is this person?
Not during Satya Yuga, the Devahuti Putra Kapila, but some more contemporary person who went by the name Kapila, taught Sankhya philosophy with an atheistic basis, an atheistic Kapila, teaching atheistic Sankhya. Not that one, the atheist Kapila. Okay. Thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.